But Tom Kosakowski is our ombudsman for the medical center and for the medical school, and he is a wealth of information and knowledge. He is an attorney who graduated from Occidental College in Loyola. He is the current president of the International Ombudsman Association and publisher of Ombuds blog. I've learned a lot in working with him, and I think that you'll learn a lot from him. He really provides conflict resolution assistance to faculty, staff, the professional schools, laboratories, related institutes, and he provides feedback to university administrators on systematic issues. He has had a long history of being an ombudsman. He established the office at Claremont Graduate University, and he was the interim director of Ombuds services at UC Riverside. So we really welcome you. I'm sure that you're going to learn a lot, and I will probably watch it later on the internet through our website. So for your colleagues and friends who don't have an opportunity to come to some of these lectures, all of them are on our website, DGSOM Diversity. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Gordon. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
I take it that none of you really know what the Ombuds office is or what I do. Is that pretty accurate? Okay. So let me start by giving you an overview of what the Ombuds office does and how I work with people. I will give you a few tips for managing the conflict that you probably will encounter if you haven't already. And I'll close with a little bit of a case scenario that might give a little bit more definition to the sort of things that I do. So to start off here, the mission of the UCLA Ombuds Office is to serve all members of the campus and to provide confidential, independent, neutral, and informal assistance with any sort of university issue. So that means that we see frosh with roommate disputes, tenured faculty members with research issues, employees that have questions about policies and workplace conflicts, really almost anything you can imagine that comes from one of the many different settings on campus here. And before I talk a little bit more about what I do, I want to acknowledge that I think conflict is inevitable in academia. We work in a system where we're required to collaborate and cooperate with each other, and yet we all have competing goals, and sometimes those are really directly incompatible. Meanwhile, there are scarce resources. Putting aside the California state budget crisis, there simply isn't enough for every laboratory and every department and every school to do everything that they want to do. So there's inevitable competition for the resources that are available. And then we all have to put up with some sort of interference in our work that comes from others, whether it's the administrators in our department, the students that have competing goals that are working with us. You can fill in the blanks and think about the people that interact with you on a daily or weekly basis that provide some level of interference with what your singular objectives are. So I want to say that conflict is normal. And my emphasis is not today on telling you how to prevent conflict or how to avoid conflict, but really how to manage it, because it's part of what everyone has to deal with in life at a university. So I want to give people some comfort level for the fact that there will be conflict, and that's normal. Going back to talk about what the Ombuds Office does here, there are Ombuds programs in hundreds of different organizations, the United Nations, several Fortune 500 corporations, and hundreds of institutions like UCLA, research universities. So if you see your alma mater go by, you know that they have an Ombuds program as well. And that's not even the complete list. I left off, community colleges. There are four fundamental attributes for the Ombuds Office, and I mentioned those earlier. Those are that we are always confidential, we are independent, we're neutral, and we're informal in our work. And these apply to every situation that we are involved with, whether we're giving one-on-one coaching to someone who's come to us, or whether we're going up to an administrator to identify some broad concern or systemic issue, we follow these ethical tenets at all times. So let me give a little more definition to these. The confidentiality of my work is the most important aspect. It really sets the Ombuds office apart from others on the campus. And we do several things to protect the confidentiality of our work. We don't keep records of our cases. We don't reveal the information that we learn or discuss with our visitors. We keep basically everything a secret. People can and they do tell me about things that they think violate ethics, university policies, and even the law. And unlike other employees and other offices on this campus, we have a duty to keep those things a secret. The big exceptions to our assurance of confidentiality are if there seems to be a threat of imminent physical harm to someone, and we are probably mandated reporters of child and elder abuse, although given the population we work with, those are rare exceptions. An important example of how we keep significant secrets can be found in a UC-wide policy on sexual harassment reporting. The UC system and UCLA as a campus want people to report allegations of sexual harassment whenever they come up. And it's basically a mandate for supervisors. So if you have employees or anyone that you supervise, if you hear about sexual harassment, you have a duty to report it so it can be investigated and handled further. The UC-wide policy specifically exempts two offices. One is therapy and counseling service offices, and the other are the Ombuds offices on the various campuses. So that's a good example of how the whole system expects us to keep our secrets. The second aspect of our work is that it's independent in nature. Administratively, we report as part of the Chancellor's Extended Office. I don't have a reporting relationship with Dr. Washington or anyone else on the South Campus. So that gives me a lot of independence in the work that I do on a day-to-day basis. And I don't have collateral duties that might interfere. So I'm not a faculty member or a student. This is my only role here at UCLA. The third aspect, it's really hard to come up with pictorial things that illustrate these aspects. So Switzerland is neutrality. That's, in case you're wondering why that's there. I have a professional obligation and a job expectation that I will remain neutral at all times. So I'm not permitted to protect the university or advocate for individuals. We're basically responsible for being neutral with respect to all the parties and all the issues. We may, however, advocate for a fair process, and we may raise issues that are broad-based and systemic in nature if we can protect the confidentiality of the person that's brought those issues to our attention. The last aspect of our work is that it's informal in nature. Most employees and faculty are aware of the HR processes, promotion and tenure processes of evaluation, disciplinary matters, and those sort of things. An important part of what I do is help people understand those formal processes and what sort of formal remedies may be available to them. But we will not participate in any of the formal processes. So you won't find an ombuds coming to attend a grievance hearing or a P&T meeting, that sort of thing. Our work is to provide the informal alternatives to those formal processes. So here's an example of the sort of things that the Ombuds office does. All of our cases start by listening to a person, hearing out their situation, and helping them sort of clarify what their issues are, what their potential objectives may be. We will tell people about the resources that are available, the policies that apply. In some cases, we'll help them understand what the culture is of this institution if they're new to UCLA. We will often refer them to another resource if that would be appropriate. And in many cases, we just end up coaching that one person, one-on-one, giving them the information that they need, letting them ask us questions and develop a strategy with our input. And that's called conflict coaching. We'll also work with more than one person if we can facilitate a conversation, or if there's a well-defined conflict and the parties want us to be the mediator, we will do that as well. The things we don't do include receiving formal grievances and complaints, deciding who was right or wrong in the past, telling people how a dispute should be resolved, enforcing any agreement to resolve a conflict, and we don't provide legal or psychological advice. Dr. Gordon mentioned that my as an attorney, but UCLA doesn't employ me or insure me in that role, so I want people not to think they're going to get legal advice from me. It's just a good educational background for the work that I do. So let me, do people have questions about how the Ombuds office works, or do you want to save those till the end? Yes?
Yeah, it doesn't, I mean, so who comes to you and what can you actually do for them? It sounds like you can't do a lot, you don't do a lot. And what is that, like what's an example of a
Okay.
complaint or something?
I will get to an example of a case. You know, it's interesting because people have raised that issue with me before. If you don't have the power to do anything, what good are you? But by the same token, not having power sort of gives us the ability to talk to a lot of people and raise questions, and sometimes that can be as effective as telling people what to do. There are many ombuds who compare their role to the character of the little boy in the Emperor's New Clothes, who didn't tell the emperor to get dressed. He just asked why everyone said he was naked. So there are sometimes that the ombuds just exercises that ability to ask questions. You know, why is this department losing its staff at a much more rapid rate than before? Why is this policy being interpreted this way in this department differently than others? You know, are you aware of this particular issue involving these employees, and how do you feel about it, and what might you do about it? So they're, you know, in that way, we're like mediators who might not have the power to solve the case, but they do have the power to bring people together and give them a safe place to talk about what's going on.
How many actual ombuds people are there?
There are 3 of us and a case administrator. I think there's contact information in the brochure there, and if you were to call the office, this audience would probably be assigned to me, but there are 2 others so that we ensure that there's always someone available to provide a service, to have a meeting. And we're one of the few free services still on campus. Maybe not as important to staff and faculty, but the students really seem to think that's important because they pay for everything else.
We do too.
Okay. Any other questions about what I do? Not that you can't ask them later. In the past, when I've given this sort of presentation, Dr. Gordon and others have asked me to give some advice for how people might help manage the conflict in their life. And so I have a few suggestions, and I'll run through those sort of quickly, but that's mostly to give you a flavor of things that you might want to think about when you're starting to encounter conflict or when you anticipate there may be conflict. The first is to understand that there are differences here at UCLA. We are different than other universities. The School of Medicine is different from other schools here on campus. All the departments and labs have differences between them. And so my encouragement is to figure those differences out early, and to acknowledge that things are different where you are now, and try to be strategic when you are acclimating to your new environment. Similarly, I encourage people to get advice, especially if they're new to the institution or new to a particular situation. People don't have to figure out things on their own. It's okay to get input from people that know the institution better, maybe familiar with the situation or some of the players. So I encourage you not to feel like you have to handle things on your own. That's part of the service that the Ombuds office provides. Next, I encourage people to be upfront about important issues. And if you can, try to make agreements with stakeholders in advance. I sent some materials that I thought were going to be distributed, and perhaps they're outside, but there is a handout that I encourage everyone to read. It's a short article that was published by the Office of Research Integrity. Did you all get that? This talks about something called a prenup for scientists. And this is basically the before you start a project, if your grant gets funded, or even before your grant gets funded, make agreements with people about how the money is going to be spent, how the project is going to unfold, who will have responsibility for specific items during the course of the grant. Try to anticipate as many problems that may come up and figure out how you might resolve them, either in advance or by creating some mechanism to address them when they do come up. It's much easier to negotiate those sort of things in advance and then rely on that agreement when there's a problem than it is to go into a project not knowing how problems will be resolved and try to figure them out in the heat of the moment or even after the fact. So I strongly recommend this article, and I encourage you to think about signing a prenup with your stakeholders if you have the opportunity to. And if you feel like that's something that may work for you and you want to talk about it more, I will be happy to talk to you about what you should consider, how you should approach the negotiation, what things might be included. The next thing I recommend is that I want people to give their conflicts room to breathe. When you realize that you are having a conflict with someone, give it some time. Don't feel like you have to resolve it immediately if you do have time at your disposal. People are often more rational and willing to be constructive after they've had a time to reflect. So if you find yourself in a conflict and people seem to be upset, you can acknowledge that this is an important issue and that emotions are high, but you want to talk about it more later. So give yourself that luxury. Let's see. Oh, okay. On this particular issue, I have another handout that kind of goes along with this. A big part of what I do, especially for scientists, is encourage them to actually address the concerns and conflicts when they come up. I don't know whether there's a real psychological type or personality type that among hard scientists that makes them conflict avoidant. I don't know if it's an aspect of the education that they've received, but it seems to me that there is a lot of conflict avoidance that goes along in the hard sciences. And so people will often come to me finding themselves in a conflict, but having not had the conversation to try to resolve that conflict or address that conflict at an earlier point. So I encourage people to consider being more proactive. And when they do figure out that there's a conflict, go to the person that they have the problem with. Go to the other stakeholder in that concern. Try to avoid immediately going to their supervisor. Try not to gossip and create rumors about the situation. Which can be tempting. But it's also a little bit daunting to try to do that, to have that direct conversation to resolve an issue. So I do have some pointers, and I've printed them out here. This is a sheet called Handling a Difficult Conversation. I encourage you to read that, and if you want advice and coaching, I will do that. I've had people come into my office and say, okay, I realize I've got to have a conversation with my PI or my project manager or the CAO in my department, and I'm not sure how to do it, and I will let them practice. I'll figure out what questions they should anticipate, what issues they need to be ready for, and I'll give them a chance to go through it once and make their mistakes and figure out what they're going to say in a safe place before they go ahead and have that conversation. So if this still doesn't really give you an overview of what I do, I have an example here. This is not actually based on a case that I have handled. And I have to say this because whenever I go and give presentations, especially if there's a longer, more complex case example, people start to wonder if it's about them. Last month I went to make a presentation to faculty at LSU, and I had a case that was based on something that I had worked on at UC Riverside. And so I laid out this scenario. I gave a very detailed fact pattern, and several of the people in the room started to look uncomfortable. And afterward, the LSU Ombuds said, everybody was worried that you were talking about the case that I handled here last fall that resulted in a vice provost being let go. And they were like, half the people that were in his department were here and thought that I was giving away all of their secrets. But in fact, it wasn't, and it kind of exemplified to me that the problems that we have to deal with, every other university has to deal with as well. So in this particular scenario, we have a successful PI who's been here a long time, and she has two very highly valued staff members that have become locked in a dispute that's gone on for a while. The project manager, who's also been here for a long time, has overseen several projects and now has a problem with a third-year postdoc. This postdoc is also very important and valuable to the lab because they have developed some new techniques that were going to help the grant move forward and get past some of the impasses that they've had in the research. This tension between the project manager and the postdoc has resulted in some blow-ups, although these haven't been witnessed by the PI. These have been, somewhat private, semi-private in the lab. Some of the other lab members have been concerned separately that the project manager is difficult to work with since his wife filed for divorce and he has a side business that's starting to demand more of his time when he's not at work. So this is not about any of your labs, right? So in this sort of situation, it would not be surprising that the postdoc comes to talk to us about her situation. She doesn't really know what to do, and she's so upset that she's considering an offer that she has in hand from another lab to go there to do her research and join that team. So this is the sort of situation that will come to us. Although it's not the majority of cases, this is not a surprising case. And, well, any suggestions on how do you talk to the postdoc about this situation? Anybody? Well, my approach with people, and it would be with the postdoc in this situation, is to get more information from her. It will often take half an hour to hear this story in all its detail, but inevitably there are questions about the situation that I have that she hasn't thought to include in the chronology. So for example, I would be asking her, what does she want for herself in the short term and the long term? Does she want to stay in academia? Does she want to stay at UCLA? Is this other lab a much better fit for her and her long-term objectives, or is this just a Band-Aid to solve this current problem? So it's important to talk about really what her goals are long-term, because that will help inform her decision in the short term. A question I might ask here is, how would the project manager react if I offered to facilitate a conversation between the two of them? Usually I only know the person who's come in. I don't know the rest of the players in the drama. And the postdoc might be able to answer that question about whether there might be some more proactive role for me, perhaps by talking to the other person involved in the conflict. I might ask her some questions that would diagnose the problem a little bit more for me. How would other people see the conflict, and how would other people see the situation in the lab? There's a little bit in the chronology here, but how has the relationship between the postdoc and the project manager changed over time? Has it gotten better or worse? Did it get off to a bad start and it's stayed that way? What is the trend, and how is that important to what she's trying to figure out what to do? I want to know what the postdoc is willing to do. People have their own comfort level with addressing conflict, and if she is very highly conflict avoidant, then that sort of limits the options for her. However, if she's willing to be more engaged and willing to be coached to handle the situation very proactively on her own part, there are a number of ways that she can handle this strategically. And one last question I would ask here is, since this is an issue that's starting to affect more than just two people, it's starting to affect the lab overall, since some of the resolutions may impact the lab quite significantly in the long run, how would the PI respond if I came to her and said, I'm aware that there's conflicts in your lab, and how do you perceive it, and what might you be willing to do. So these are all examples of how I might address the situation, and none of them involve me telling any of the players what they should do and who is right or wrong. And it's not really exercising power, but it's just providing information and offering to facilitate and work with people as they try to resolve it informally. And the assurance, of course, goes along with my work that I would treat all the conversations with anyone involved as strictly confidential. And I'm not going to go back and tell the chair or the dean or anyone else that I was in fact working with this particular group, which usually is reassuring, usually. So I don't have a long presentation, but that's the overview of what I do and some advice and tips that I have. But I'm happy to answer more questions for any of you. Yes?
Do you ever meet with more than 2 people at one? Okay.
I do.
So in that situation, if you thought it was best for the people involved, that it was best for the PI to land and the postdoc meet?
Right. On a couple of occasions, a PI has come to me and said, I think there's trouble brewing in my lab, but I don't know what it is, and I'd like to get a better handle on it. Actually, this happens more frequently in the hospital. And I would come into say a department meeting and introduce myself and give a little bit of my spiel, and then offer to let people come and talk to me confidentially. And I would collect their comments and concerns for feedback to the group and to the administrators so that they might have a better handle on what's going on. So that happens. And sometimes a group will come to me. I've worked with student groups where the leaders have said, we've got this issue that's dividing us, and we all have an opinion, so none of us can really facilitate the conversation. We don't want to go to the dean of students about it. Would you come in and help us have a meeting to put the issues on the table and talk through them? And we'll come in as sort of meeting facilitators to do that with them. So those are 2 examples I have. Yes?
Do your interventions ever backfire? Like, you bring it to, your higher up, and they're just so angry that it just, it makes it worse. They're not used to having someone bring an outside party in.
That really hasn't happened, but it's a continuous concern for me, because I never want to make things worse. I know I might not be able to make things better, but I never want to make them worse. So usually when I rely on people to say, don't go to the PI, don't go to the chair. They will see this in a very unfavorable way. So I trust their judgment on whether or not I can approach someone else. And even when I do, it's in a very neutral and constructive way. So in this sort of situation, if I were to call up the PI, I would make sure that they understood what the Ombuds does, maybe give them referrals to other people they can talk to reassure them that I'm not there with some sort of objective or punishment in hand. But then when I describe why I'm contacting them, it's to say that I'm aware that there's a concern and people want to address it and make things better. And this, would the PI be willing to talk to me? Would she be comfortable talking to me? And does she see that there's any sort of role for me? So it wouldn't be to give away any of the negative information. It wouldn't be to suggest that there's some role for me in particular. It would be very open-ended and emphasizing mostly that people want to improve the situation. So usually that avoids throwing a firebomb into the situation. Yeah. Yes?
If someone wanted to initiate, you come into the department to speak in regards to an issue, how would they go about initiating that meeting with you? Would they have to meet with you first and have some sessions, or would you do groundwork?
The first step is to contact us. Sometimes I'll meet with a department or a group after I've met with a couple of individuals. Sometimes it will come after one person has contacted me, and then I speak to the decision maker, the administrator, whatever their title is, and then I will come to a meeting. So it depends on the circumstances. But it almost always starts with a request from someone who's involved. Question? Other questions? I have 2 offices. There's one directly upstairs, a couple floors. And then if people want to get out of this building, we have a larger office in the Strathmore building, which is where you pay your parking tickets and get your bus passes and that sort of thing. I can usually see people on 24 or 48 hours notice, so I have a lot of flexibility in my schedule. And if people need to talk with me by phone or meet off hours or even away from the campus, I'm available to do that as well. Yes?
Just another question, there's something you mentioned about you should have like, you should try to have like a pre-match, you said. So that like that would be a written contract, right?
Yeah, and I don't want it to see, it doesn't need to seem legalistic or have legal terms in it. It really would be a conversation that you have with one or two people where you talk about, you know, what's the purpose, how are we going to spend the money, who's responsible for this, how are we going to decide who publishes, who will we let make presentations and give poster talks, you know, those sort of questions. And once you've talked through them in person and reached some sort of agreement, then you might send an email to say, you know, thanks for talking about it. Here are the things I understand. Yeah, here's what we said. And it doesn't have to be signed and notarized. It doesn't have to use the word whereas.
Okay.
Things like that. It can just be a fairly straightforward email to say, you know,
Just
thanks
so
for
you
helping
go
me.
back to it.
Yeah.
So when someone tries to back out.
Exactly,
here's what we
exactly.
said. Okay. That makes sense.
And this article is pretty good, gives some suggestions about it too, but I'd be happy to talk about a specific example. Other
Do
questions?
you talk to staff regarding non-work related?
Only if it has some relationship to the job. So, oh, okay, I can't give that example. A student would come to me, not a good example because it's not a staff, but a student might come to us and say, my off-campus landlord is trying to charge me for my roommates half of the rent, even though they moved out, and now I can't resolve it with him. Can you help me? Well, we can't, because that's an off-campus matter. It doesn't really touch on the campus. But if there are roommates who both work in the same department and their underlying feud is starting to affect the workplace, then I probably would. There needs to be some connection to UCLA. But I'll almost always meet with someone the first time to see what's going on. Yeah.
Have the unions ever gotten involved after?
That's a good question. The federal law, at least the way I interpret it, requires a federally appointed mediator if there's a conflict that involves a collective bargaining agreement. So when people come in and they say, my department is violating the union contract, I tell them they need to go talk to their union rep, because that's kind of off limits for ombuds. And usually they need someone who's going to advocate for them. If it's violating the union doesn't want it to get resolved with a resolution that's not part of the agreement. They want to be involved and know that it's going to comply. So, but there are 15 unions on campus, or maybe it's more now, and so most of the people that come to me are unionized in some way, but the conflict or the concern is not covered by the contract, and that's how I can help them. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much. My information's there. Call me anytime. Thank you.